Hi, and welcome to another Friday Ask Us Anything live. So following on from last week's video, I am going to be continuing with the important rules to remember in English. So if you missed last week's part two video and the week before part one video, please watch it as I give some the part one video is talking about the classic myths, so you know that they are not rules. And then part two is talking about the first important rules in English. And so now I'm going to continue with the next 5 important rules to know, so that you make less mistakes in English and have better fluency. So rule number 5, following on from last week's video, is sentence construction. So generally speaking, sentences in English are not particularly long. This is good news for English learners because it means you don't need to worry about writing long, complex sentences. A sentence usually has 2 or possibly 3 clauses: subject, verb, object, linked by conjunction, which I talked about in the previous video. A good way to make your sentences even clearer is to add commas. Now, commas help the reader understand when one phrase finishes and another begins. So the most common occasions where it's recommended to put a comma are between 2 clauses. For example, if the weather is nice tomorrow, we're going to the park. So there's a comma in between. To separate items in a list. So for example, our kids like swimming, comma, skiing, comma, ice skating, and cycling. So you don't have a comma in the last when you add the last item on the list. After some conjunctions, for example, our holiday was great and the hotel was wonderful, full stop. However, comma. So after however, we always have a comma. The weather was awful. For extra information in the middle of a sentence. So a non-defining clause. So for example, my neighbor, comma, who's from Brazil, comma, is really good at cooking. So a non-defining clause is when we add a little bit of information, but it makes no difference to the main sentence. So the main sentence is, my neighbor is really good at cooking. I'm adding a little bit in between. So my neighbor, who's from Brazil, is really good at cooking. So we have commas on either side of that. Okay, rule number 6. So remember the word order for questions. This is really important. In English, the structure of questions is different to the affirmative form, to the positive form. So make sure you remember to change the order of the words and add the auxiliary do if you need it. So there are 4 ways to make a question in English. So we've got to be, which is an auxiliary verb. So for questions using the verb to be, invert the subject and the verb. So for example, the positive sentence is, you are a student, and the question is, are you a student? All other verbs, to make questions with other verbs, we add the auxiliary do. So for example, do they work here? And we've got modal verbs, act like to be, which is when we invert the modal verb and the subject. So for example, the positive sentence is, he can play the piano, and the question is, can he play the piano? And other auxiliary verbs, which basically is the verb have, but it's only in the present perfect when have is acting like an auxiliary verb. When it's acting like a main verb, we use the auxiliary verb do in a question. So when it's acting as an auxiliary, have is used again in the question. So for example, have you seen Bob? So these rules apply when you add a question word like what, when, how, where, why. You still keep the question word order. So where are you from? When can we meet? Why have they left? Okay. The next big rule is use the right past form of verb. So speaking about the past in English is not particularly difficult. However, every subject uses the same so every subject uses the same word to express the past. So you don't have to worry about learning 6 different words as in some languages. However, many verbs are irregular and they don't follow the regular form of just adding ed. There are no rules to this. There is no reason why. You just have to learn them. And there are approximately 20. So for example, go is went, have is had, make, made. So for example, we went to the cinema last Saturday. They had a party to celebrate Isla's birthday. I made a cake yesterday. Okay. Rule number 8, get familiar with the main English verb tenses. This is really important, and I've done a lot of videos on the different verb tenses, including a 3-part series on all the tenses in English. So please have a watch of those videos, because you need to become familiar with them and you need to be able to use them correctly. If you don't, it makes it more difficult. So it's important not to translate from your language, but to properly think in English. So please check out my video on all the future tenses, all the present tenses, and all the past tenses, so that you can learn the difference and use the right tenses correctly. And rule number 9, never use a double negative. This is really important, as there are often 2 ways to express a negative concept, but you're only going to use one way in a sentence. So for example, if you want to say the room is empty, you can say there is nothing in the room and there isn't anything in the room. So we've got 2 ways to express it. The word nothing is a negative by itself, and the word anything is used with a negative verb. This is very, very important. And it's the same with nobody and anybody. So there is nobody here. There isn't anybody here. None and any. There is none in there is no food, so there is none in the cupboard. There isn't any food in the cupboard. There is also the word never, which we use to talk about experience. So he's never been to the US. Or we can say he hasn't ever been. Okay, so it's very important. If you're using the negative words, nothing, nobody, none, never, you don't use it with negative verb. You use it with a positive verb. And then if you're using anything, anybody, any, ever, then you must use it with a negative verb. So those are the main rules in English. I hope that's helped. Please, if you have any questions, comment below and let me know. From next week, I'm going to do a series on the conditionals.